Sons of Anarchy meets The Walking Dead. That's the basic pitch for Days Gone, Sony Bend's upcoming open-world post-apocalypse. 6 years ago, when development began, that might have been a fresh idea. And while we haven't seen many games that dive into biker culture, the pop culture zombie frenzy has descended from its crescendo, and formulaic open-world games are now a dime a dozen. In other words, the marketers at Sony have an uphill battle against the perception, or perhaps misperception, that this is just another open-world game, just another zombie game, or just another open-world zombie game. And no, calling these things freakers instead of zombies isn't going to make a bit of difference. There are aspects of Days Gone that appear to set it apart, but are they interesting enough to matter even if the game is good? The developers have released hours of gameplay footage and commentary, and those who attended PAX South recently got to play the game for themselves. Reactions have ranged from mixed to enthusiastically positive, so let's examine the good and the bad. How does this game follow open-world conventions, and what have Sony Bend done to distinguish their post-apocalypse as yet another that demands your attention? Join me as I look at everything we know about Days Gone. Days Gone takes place 2 years after a global catastrophe turned most of the world's population into nimble, zombie-like creatures which have come to be known, for better or worse, as freakers. You play a biker named Deacon St. John, and you get to explore 6 separate regions of Eastern Oregon. We've seen everything from small towns and open valleys to densely wooded forests and boulder-laden foothills. On their own, each setting is beautiful. Yet when seen one after the other, they all seem to, well, blend together. Maybe we haven't seen all 6 regions just yet, but based on what has been shown, the setting of Days Gone appears to be a well-crafted soup of muted browns, earthy greens, and not much else. But stick with me because there's a lot more to this world than its appearance. The game will present some variety, both visually and in terms of gameplay, thanks to a persistent weather system. Weather occurs dynamically, so you can experience snow, rain, and sun all in the same biome, or even in the same story beat. It might be warm and sunny on your first attempt through a mission, and on the next it could be cold, dark, and stormy. All this affects gameplay in ways that are relevant to the world you inhabit. For example, frigid weather causes freakers to become stronger, and snow causes your bike to drift more easily. Or if you get caught in the rain, which happens a lot in Oregon, the pitter-patter of raindrops will muffle the sound of your footsteps. Handy when you're trying to sneak around. And then there's the day-night cycle. Similar to zombie games like Dying Light and to an extent State of Decay, the infected are more numerous and more powerful at night. Take shelter in a safe house or be prepared to defend yourself when the sun sets. Enemies also play a role in how environments dynamically change, particularly along the roads and trails. For example, you might be riding along a route you've traveled safely many times before, only to get clotheslined by a booby trap and ambushed by a rival faction. These surprises pop up randomly, so you'll need to stay on your toes. Clearly, the game is aiming for a level of unpredictability, but it's also worth noting just how dark and violent things get. As you'd expect, the script is laden with foul language and dripping with blood, but it's more than that. For example, you can earn respect among the game's several factions by looting freakers for their ears. That's right, infected ears act as a form of currency. The more you collect, the more your peers will show thanks for thinning the world of danger. This may seem gratuitous, but consider this. How else would you prove that you've killed one of these things? It's not like you can snap a pic with your iPhone. I just hope the brutality remains justified without shocking players for the sake of shocking players. Ultimately, it looks like the developers are hoping to create a world that feels believable and unforgiving through dark storytelling and dynamic events that you would actually encounter in a world where it's every man, woman, and creature for himself, herself, or itself. But no matter how engaging an open world, it can feel cumbersome if you can't easily get around. And for that, Days Gone aims to set itself apart with a very specific set of wheels. You can't have a game inspired by Sons of Anarchy without letting you hop on your custom two-wheeler. And in Days Gone, your motorcycle has been described as not just a mode of transportation, but more of an extension of Deacon himself. As you add upgrades, your bike changes with you. You can tweak the engine or power up your nitrous boost for increased speed, or add a new muffler for a quieter ride, both of which make for safer trips. And of course, there will be custom paint jobs. Granted, none of this is groundbreaking, but what is different from most open-world games is that, vehicles being so scarce in this world, your bike is the only one you'll get throughout the duration of the game. This makes things more interesting in several ways. First, you'll have to park carefully when on missions that require a quick getaway because you won't be able to hijack another ride when all hell breaks loose. Also, you'll need to watch your damage and fuel meters carefully. Run into too many obstacles and you'll need to perform repairs. Run out of gas and you'll have to huff it on foot to your nearest death-infested gas station. The intention wasn't to make Days Gone a bike management sim, but to add a constant layer of tension. Sony Bend have made it abundantly clear that there are no safe places in Days Gone, so leaving your bike, at least when you don't have to, is almost always a bad idea. If you do manage to stay in the saddle, it looks like rolling around the Oregonian forests and foothills could be a ton of fun. The developers realized early on that in this world, barricades, accidents, and traffic jams frozen in time would block most major thoroughfares. Hence, you'll be weaving between tree trunks and frequently catching some pretty decent air on the side roads and hidden trails. The game does feature fast travel, but if the bike handles as well as one would hope, then it might be worth taking the scenic route instead of teleporting across your map. But riding around is just one part of the gameplay, so let's look at what you'll be doing when you're not getting from point A to point B. It's hard to say before Days Gone releases just how varied the missions will be that make up the core story. So far, we've seen a bounty mission where you use your survival skills to track down a bad guy, a couple of fetch quests where you have to scavenge for supplies and bike parts, and another where you have to clear an enemy camp in order to earn your bike back from a rival gang leader. Each mission featured enemy encounters, cutscenes, and interactive story elements. Some missions even prompt you to make split decisions that affect how certain scenes play out. In one instance, you're given the choice to either kill an injured enemy or leave him for the freakers to eat alive. In the demo, we got to see what happens if you let him live, and the way things played out were swift, brutal, and best of all, totally unexpected. This example didn't appear to affect the main storyline, but Sony Bend have implied that several decisions throughout the game will permanently affect certain relationships. Finally, as for the main questline, we know it will feature around 20 main characters and last around 30 hours. Not bad, especially if that doesn't include side quests. And when it comes to the side content, expect a bunch of objective-based, open-world gameplay loops that feel mostly familiar. I say mostly because the developers are clearly relying on traditional open-world formulas while at least attempting to mix things up. For example, to reveal the map, you won't have to climb any towers, but you will have to hunt down actual maps one by one. It's no game changer, but at least it's somewhat realistic. Let's face it, if you're going to learn the lay of the land in this world, you're going to have to use maps the old-fashioned way. One of the game's more interesting objectives is locating and looting abandoned government checkpoints. Each checkpoint is locked down and requires clever thinking and careful planning to infiltrate. For example, you can activate a checkpoint's electrical generator to restore power and enable the security doors. However, in doing so, you might also activate the loudspeaker system, which will attract freakers. This can be solved preemptively by sniping the loudspeakers before turning on the electricity, but as far as I can tell, the game doesn't tell you to do this. Again, this doesn't reinvent the wheel, but what it does show is that Days Gone expects you to think for yourself when it comes to surviving. And at its core, that's why the zombie apocalypse is so appealing. We all think we're smart and creative enough to live through this terrible scenario, and it looks like Sony Bend are providing at least a few chances to put that resourcefulness to the test. This is especially true when you have to clear enemy outposts, which you'll have to do frequently, but more on that later. Another common objective includes clearing out freaker nests in order to unlock fast travel locations and minimize the threat of the most basic breed of freakers, called swarmers, across wide areas of the map. If you haven't noticed the pattern yet, this is another gameplay loop we've seen in many other open world games, but the process of luring out freakers, battling them with your scarce inventory, taking into account their strengths, their weaknesses, and how they behave, one would imagine it's all intended to create an experience that's unique to Days Gone. One final mechanic I hinted at earlier is the survival mode, which comes in handy during bounty missions or when scavenging for supplies. With a quick button press, you can heighten your senses to highlight footprints, clues, and useful items. This could be a nice palate cleanser between the more combat-focused missions, but I'm curious to see how Days Gone's survival mode is any different from the tracking system in, say, Horizon Zero Dawn. It sure looks awfully close. Ultimately, it looks like Sony Bend have taken what works in other open-world games and put just enough of their own spin on things to make everything work in the context of Days Gone. Granted, those are the table stakes for any AAA game, especially one from Sony's stable of talented studios. So let's take a look at where things get even more interesting. At the risk of oversimplifying, combat in Days Gone appears to come in two forms: tactical and head-on. Taking a direct approach seems to work pretty well when fighting swarmers, but not so much when taking on humans, especially in larger numbers. Known in the game world as marauders, human enemies are far more intelligent, and clearing their outposts looks to require stealth, precision, and guerrilla tactics. Part of this has to do with the game's difficulty. You see, in Days Gone, you can't adjust the difficulty setting. Or to put it another way, it has just one difficulty setting: hard. Jeff Ross, game director at Sony Bend, justified this decision quite simply in an interview with Game Informer. "The game, quote, is just not very good when it's easy," said Ross. "It's a way more exciting game, it's a lot of fun, and it kind of speaks to the fantasy of the apocalypse by being a challenge." As a gamer who likes a challenge, this was music to my ears. It means that when you're clearing an enemy camp, you won't be able to change the game to meet your level of skill. Instead, you'll have to adapt your tactics to meet the game's level of challenge. Games that do this tactfully while offering players the right set of tools are often more rewarding for it. As for your toolkit in Days Gone, crafting is a big part of the game. From Molotov cocktails to first aid supplies, you can craft items on the fly. But your resources are limited. No matter how stocked your arsenal, it looks like you'll always want to start each ambush with a strategic approach, at least when you're up against a group of marauders. So, how about you reset that bear trap to take out that annoying patrol? Then maybe lure in some nearby swarmers to take out a few more. And once the gunfire does begin, be prepared to hone your aim during some tense, cover-based standoffs. As for taking on infected enemies, at least in smaller numbers, this is where the combat appears pretty easy. Maybe too easy. From how things look, Freaker AI seems very basic, and it looks like you can take out run-of-the-mill breeds with one shotgun or pistol blast, or even one swing of your Louisville Slugger. But things look to get a little more interesting when you face off against more advanced Freakers. For example, newts, which take residence on the game's rooftops, are more nimble, but they only attack if you're injured, weakened, or if you invade their direct living quarters. So, if you plan on camping atop that gas station to snipe some marauders, you might want to think again. And then there are runners, infected wolves that are fast enough to knock you off your bike. And lastly, but certainly not least, there are ragers, which are infected bears. If you ever wanted to act out the bear scene from The Revenant, now's your chance. Sony Bend have also said there are other enemies, but despite this variety, and despite the fact that Freakers are the reason this world has become so dangerous, it appears to me that the combat is at its most interesting when taking on your more intelligent human enemies. That is, until you face off against several hundred Freakers at once. It's time to meet the HORDE. Much of what we've seen in Days Gone so far looks good, but it's the Horde that offers what looks to be the most interesting gameplay loop of the entire game. In a nutshell, you'll occasionally run across a massive swarm of freakers feeding on a mass human burial site. When this happens, you can either flee or fight. Flee and the Horde won't pay you any attention. But if you choose to fight, be warned, you must literally kill every single one of the things or you'll become part of their feast. How many, you ask? The Horde you see here has over 300, and according to Sony Bend, that's a quote, baby horde. So yeah, this is no small task, but similar to neutralizing enemy camps, things get much more interesting if you think strategically. Here's how it works. A meter appears on your screen that lets you know roughly how many freakers you've eliminated and how many are left. Weapons with an area of effect, such as Molotov cocktails and grenades, are your friend, as are fuel drums and other explosive objects throughout the environment. Other strategies include luring the Horde into a bottleneck, then unleashing hell with your assault rifle, or crushing them with a pile of timber after setting it loose with a well-timed explosion. And that's just what we've seen so far. I can only imagine the amount of fun Sony Bend had crafting different ways to take out dozens, if not hundreds of freakers at once. One thing I was a little disappointed by was that the Horde battles sound like they're exclusively a late-game activity. I get that Deacon might be ill-equipped early in the game, but this is by far the most unique aspect of gameplay within Days Gone. Leaving it for the end seems like a miss. Nonetheless, for anyone who loves a challenge and who likes to think creatively and strategically, this looks like it could be a lot of fun. So there you have it. Thank you so much for watching the entire video. You can find all the articles and videos I used to research this video in the description. I have to say, everything I've seen has made me more excited now than ever to play Days Gone when it releases. But as with any game, I encourage everyone to wait for the reviews to hit before spending your hard-earned money. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. And if you never want to miss any of my content, all it takes is clicking that subscribe button. And until soon, we'll see you in the next video.